Someone recently asked me in a comment on this YouTube channel why it is that some people who were abused as children grow up to become abusers, and some people who were abused as children don't grow up to become abusers. And I've been thinking about that for a while, and I've been answering it in my own head again and again, and I finally realized why I was having such trouble answering this question. And I think the reason is that the question isn't posed quite correctly. I think there's an assumption that some people do abuse and some people don't. And my answer is that everyone who is abused, who doesn't very quickly heal their traumas and heal from the abuse that they suffered, everybody becomes an abuser. It's just, the difference is not that some people don't become abusers and some do. It's that some people more overtly abuse others and some people don't so overtly abuse others. So yes, there are the obvious people who were abused in all sorts of different ways, sometimes horribly, and they replicate it on others. People who were sexually abused, who replicate their sexual abuse on others. People who were physically attacked or neglected, who replicate that neglect or physical attacks on others, especially those over whom they wield power. And then there are people who don't so obviously do that. And I put the people who don't so obviously replicate their overt abuse into two different categories. The first category is people who do abuse others, but it's just not so overt. They do it covertly, or they replicate the exact dynamics of their abuse metaphorically on others in ways that either people don't see or don't recognize, or that are considered societally acceptable, societally sanctioned areas of abuse. And there's all sorts of ways to abuse other people in socially acceptable ways. The primary way I think about is how many parents that I know, this is the norm, this is so average, they neglect their children's emotional needs in all sorts of different ways, and sometimes overtly violate them in all sorts of different ways that isn't considered abusive. I mean, I think of, like, for instance, circumcision. Parents letting their little boys get circumcised. This so often happens in so many different cultures around the world. I mean, when I was a child in America, 100%, 99% of young boys, baby boys, were circumcised. And their parents who let them do this, let the doctors do this to them, the parents weren't considered abusers. The doctors weren't considered abusers, but this was abuse. And this is just one example. Or spanking children. It's like, often that's considered a good thing in so many different places in the world, often in so many different places in America. This is considered a good thing when a child acts out to spank them. Well, why are they acting out? So often they're acting out because they've already been neglected and they're abused and their feelings are bursting out in all sorts of different ways because they're not being given a loving space to be able to heal. Often the people who harmed them most, their parents, can't afford to have them feel their feelings and heal. So the children are bursting at the seams, are acting out, and then the parents punish them even further, violate them and traumatize them even further by spanking them, by withholding certain things, by yelling at them, by isolating them, by humiliating them, shaming them, helping them get psychiatric diagnoses, even putting them on medications. This is abuse. When parents do this, they have become abusers. But it's often socially acceptable abuse. It's not stepping over certain socially unacceptable lines. And so I put people in that category too, of they have become abusers. It's just not so obvious. Maybe they don't even realize it. Maybe their children don't even realize it. They're not getting the abuser label stuck on their forehead like someone who sexually abuses their child or does something horrible or more overtly horrible. But then there's the third category, and that is people who abuse themselves. I've seen this so commonly with people who, the farthest thing from their mind is that they are replicating their abusive dynamics from their childhood, that they are abusers also. I've seen it sometimes with people who the world thinks are profoundly good people, too good even. This person is perfect, they're so loving, they wouldn't hurt a fly. Sometimes literally they wouldn't hurt a fly. And yet in their internal dynamics with themselves, they can be pretty nasty in terms of the way they talk to themselves in private, the way they think about themselves, the way they treat their bodies sometimes. Sometimes they have terrible addictions, sometimes overt, sometimes hidden. I think even if, it's controversial to say this, I don't mean to, make a mountain out of a molehill, but people who kill themselves, it's like an ultimate form of self-abuse. If someone did that to someone else, they're considered a murderer. They're considered someone who committed homicide, a horrible, horrible, socially unethical and inappropriate thing. And yet when people do this to themselves, we tend to have a lot more sympathy for them, and probably rightly so, but these people have also taken their own lives. They're not considered abusers. It's almost like, and I think this applies to all the different ways in which people can treat themselves horribly, neglect themselves in different ways, deprive themselves of various things, not help themselves grow, not make good decisions for themselves, spend their money poorly, not live up to their potential, all different ways in which people abuse themselves. We tend not to think of such people as abusers, not even abusers of themselves. And I think a big part of this is somehow it's a strange thing in our modern world. It's like we think that people have a right to treat themselves horribly. Like, you can treat yourself horribly and get a pass. There's no law against it. There's no social rules against it. Maybe people want to put a little distance between them and you if they see you doing this. It's like, obviously, it's not so good to be in a close relationship with someone, an intimate relationship, friendship even, with someone who is treating themselves horribly. But it's almost like people are considered, it's like they have a right to do this, like they own themselves in a way, so they get a pass. They don't get called abusers. But I think often, from what I've seen often, always pretty much, the dynamics of replicating one's own history of abuse are there. Whether it's someone outwardly abusing other people, quietly, subtly, with social acceptance, abusing other people, or abusing themselves in all sorts of different ways. The same dynamics. So when I think about, well, why do some people become abusers and some people not? That's how I answer the question in the first part. And then in the second part, I think actually the question is valid. Why do some people grow up to become abusers of themselves or of others, overtly, covertly? And why do some people not? Because I think there are some people who are not abusers of themselves or others. And slowly, I have been more and more putting myself in that category of someone who's not an abuser. And that's because I've healed, or almost fully healed, done a huge amount of internal healing. And the process of healing, emotional healing, healing from trauma, figuring out what happened to me, reclaiming all my feelings, grieving, primarily grieving, going through the whole process of integrating all those lost parts of myself, all those stripped away parts of myself, all those hidden, blocked feelings, the feelings that otherwise were being played out in abusive dynamics toward others and self. The more I've done that, the less I need to act out those dynamics outwardly or inwardly. And I've become less of an abuser. And I've seen this with others. I've seen this with many others who engage. Everyone who I know who is engaging in the healing process is becoming less of an abuser. So to answer that question, why do some people grow up to become abusers and some people not? I think someone could enter adulthood and in no way be an abuser. The first way would be if they weren't traumatized at all, but I've never seen that to be the case, not remotely. Everybody I've seen to some degree or other is traumatized, is wounded, has been violated and abused or neglected, neglect being a form of abuse. But of the people, of everyone who has been abused and traumatized in some way, maybe there could be some people out in the world who were able to heal early on. Maybe they had some people in their lives who didn't abuse them or abused them so little and gave them a space, a loving space, a nurturing space to grow and heal and feel their feelings and integrate. And with such people, I imagine that they could grow up to be so connected, to no longer have any buried pushed down, denied, dissociated, unresolved abuse dynamics inside of them. And if there were no more unresolved abuse dynamics inside of them, buried beneath the surface, and I say this hypothetically because I've never seen this to be true with anyone, but if throughout the course of their childhood they were able to resolve all of these issues, then hypothetically they could grow up and enter adulthood without ever becoming an abuser of anyone.